Tom Wygand. It's June 3rd, 2020, 7 o'clock in the evening. And we're going to open the regular meeting of the Ottawa City Commission. And we ask the city clerk, Amy Finch, to read the disclosure for our distancing meeting.
This is Amy Finch, City Clerk speaking, and I'll be providing information for remote access to tonight's meeting, as well as procedural guidelines that will be followed for this meeting. Due to social distancing and the prohibition of a gathering of 10 or more people to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, physical access to the City Commission meeting will be restricted. In accordance with the Kansas Open Meetings Act, COMA, the meeting can be viewed live on Channel 23 and via Facebook Live, or listened to by dialing 312-626-6799 and entering meeting ID code 997-5848-2561#. That information is also available at the top of today's agenda. Guidelines for this meeting are as follows. Each member of the public, staff, or presenter is required to state the individual's name, title, if any, each time the individual speaks or votes, so that the individual can be identified by remote listeners or observers. Citizens that submitted comments by 4 p.m. today to public comments at ottawaks.gov or to staff members were given to the City Commission to be read during public comment or during discussion on an agenda item. The Commission must describe at the beginning of the meeting the process that will be used for a closed or executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319 and amendments thereto.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This is Mayor Tom Wygand. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and I'd ask the clerk to read, do the roll call.
Mayor Wygand?
Yes, present.
Commissioner Kaler?
Present.
Commissioner Crowley? Commissioner Skidmore?
Present.
Commissioner Jorgensen?
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum. The mayor wants to welcome all of those that are watching on Facebook Live and other social media, as well as my phone tonight. We want to now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation by Commissioner Skidmore. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Commissioner Skidmore.
Sure. Well, first I wanted to read something that Franklin Graham wrote recently online. It says this: we need to pray for peace because the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. That's James 1:20. We need to pray for perspective because the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. That's from James 3:17. Pray for patience because of God's kindness and forbearance and patience toward us all. Romans 2:4. And pray for the outpouring of his wisdom and direction for our leaders and officials who are dealing with this crisis. Ask God to change hearts and heal this divide in our nation. Let's pray. Well, Father, those words right there would be a prayer in of itself. We have a hurting nation that needs to be mended. It is divided and we need healing. And Lord, I pray for every heart out there in this great country of ours that would all turn to you and recognize that you have perfect love and mercy and grace, and respect for one another is what we need. So Father, I just pray that for all the people. We thank you for our city, that we've been spared from this tragedies we watch on television each night. We're thankful for this community and the love we have for one another. And now we ask for direction tonight as we conduct this meeting, ask for your guidance and direction. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Commissioner. With that, we come to the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as listed.
Second.
Been moved and seconded.
Mr.
All those in favor say,
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Jorgensen seconded.
thank you.
yeah. Okay, any other discussion on that? Being none, all in favor of the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Okay, item 8. Public comments. I understand we do have a public comment tonight.
Mr. Mayor, this is City Clerk Amy French speaking. We do have, Richard Jackson would like to speak under public comment. We did have one other piece of written testimony that will be addressed during the public hearing.
Okay. Richard, being a former mayor, I'm not sure you need to hear what your restrictions are. I'm going to give you an open forum, and would you please state your comments?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Past few days, I think everyone is aware of what has been taking place in our country, demonstrations, protests. Not all of that is bad, but it caused me to think as a community such as Ottawa, what could we do? We're not immune from what takes place around us, what takes place in the United States. So thinking about that, I called Dr. Reggie Ottawa University last week, and we had a discussion on something that we might do, whether it be to write some type of op-ed for the newspaper, and talked about getting back together. And we decided that we ought to give Richard Nystead, city manager, a call and include him in the group. So I asked Dr. Reggie what his schedule was, and he says, I'm full, but whatever the city manager time comes up with, it'll work for him. So I got a hold of the city manager first thing Monday morning. I told him that whatever time he had works fine. And so we agreed on 2:00 Monday afternoon and came together and had a dialogue on what was taking place in the country and how, as a community, we might address it. And I think a lot of what's going on when we look at the discourse and so forth, I think in many cases it is a lack of respect for each other, a willingness to sit down, to talk to each other, to figure out ways to get around the issues that concern us all. And I think we're all reminded to remember that Jesus says we are to love our neighbors as we would love ourselves. Love plays a big part in that. And I know it's difficult to love people when they do things to you and they hurt you. And you awful hard to forgive them, and it's awful hard to love them. But sometimes we have to put that aside and put our differences aside and come to the table. So we had a discussion of some things that we might do in regards to this, and came upon the idea of possibly holding a town hall meeting, including some of the community leaders here in Ottawa, and have an open dialogue. We talked about possibly using COFO question and answer session, and I did talk to COFO, and they're working on that to see if they can make that come to reality. So I think it would give us an opportunity as a community to come together and talk about the things that go on around us, and in some small way, make our community better. Now, when you come into the north side of Ottawa, there's a sign that says working to make this an inclusive community. And sometimes I wonder, are we really doing that, or is those just words on a sign that's been there for a number of years? Are we taking that at face value and as a community doing all the things that we need to do? This community doesn't do everything perfect, and it's things that they can do better. It seems to me as leaders, we have a responsibility to do what we can to work within our community to make people feel that they're welcome, that they can go to the commission, that they can go to the school board, whatever the case may be, and voice their opinion and have a civil dialogue on how that's going to be resolved for the best interest of the community. I look at Ottawa University, the Osha Community College. We have kids that come from outside of our community. We have high school students that are going to move on to other places? And are we teaching them to deal with the problems and things that they'll face in the world once they leave this community? Are we teaching them the things that they need to know, how to respect each other, how to love each other, how to deal with differences? And when I talk about love, it's not love someone that looks like you or talks like you. I think everybody has something to offer, and many times we spend our time looking at the negatives of the person as opposed to what they have to offer. So I think that's something that we'll want to work on as a community, and certainly involve the city commission. I'd like to thank the city commission for supporting things that they've done over the years with the Black History Month, the Martin Luther King program, and other things that we try to do in this community, working with the university and some of the inclusive programs that they have. And I think that one thing, it's a plus here. There's many pluses for this community, but one of the things is that the fire department, the police department, and city staff are allowed to attend those things where they can gain an education and a better understanding of the world, I guess the world around us. Many of you may not know, and I'm not sure, but if I had to guess, I would bet that we were one of the first in the state to come up with a diversity statement, and that was written in the mid 2000s. I don't know, 2002, somewhere in there, when diversity statements weren't popular. So I think we've done many things, but I think there's much more that we need to do, and I think it's an opportunity to sit down and talk to our citizens so that they do feel welcome and do feel that this is an inclusive community. So I'd just like to thank the city commission for your work and all the things you do. And I know it's difficult sometimes to do the right thing when you're standing there and you have people looking at you. But I guess that's why you're there. And so I thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Richard. I think you're doing a great good with those kind of thoughts and actions. If we can pull that together and have some commonality and bring people together to discuss those issues and that separation and the divisiveness that we need to overcome. So thank you so much for your remarks. And I think let the commission, let the city manager know any way that we can help or be involved.
Thank you. We'll do.
Okay. Okay. At this time, I'd like to give the commissioners a chance to declare any conflict or communication they've had that might influence their ability to consider today's issues impartially. Anybody have any problems with that? Okay. Item 10, Madam Clerk, I better get back to letting you do some work here. Yeah.
This is Amy Finch, City Clerk speaking. Agenda item 10, hearing to consider evidence regarding remodeling proposal by the owner of the building at 117 North Main.
So Mayor Tom Wygand, to hear public comments due to State Historical Preservation Office ruling of denial of the project exterior changes. City Commission should consider testimony related to historical needs and whether feasible or reasonable alternatives should be pursued rather than the owner's plan. I will open this public meeting at 7:14. Anyone here to speak to this?
Mr. Mayor, this is Wendy Lee, the Community Development Director. I thought I would give a little bit of an overview of what we've presented to you in study session, as well as let you know who else is on the call that may want to testify during the hearing time.
Okay, please do.
As this, again, Wendy Lee, City Community Development Director. As we communicated in our memo, staff had been made aware that the owner, Kyle Thurman, had visited with representatives from the State Historic Preservation Office, and they had indicated to him that they were going to deny his request related to the front of the building, the west side of the building's remodel. And that was done some while back, and we identified to him what the process would be for appealing that decision. So the building at 117 North Main is the one that is under discussion tonight. It's within the Historic Central Business District as created and modified several years ago by the Main Street organization. The state SHPO office determined that the proposed project didn't meet the Secretary of Interior's standards, and their view was that it was going to damage the contributing resources of that district. As you probably all know, the building's been vacant for a number of years and is not in good condition. We could easily call it blighted condition. The applicant proposes to have offices with an open concept, with a possible, and this is where the question is, potential indoor-outdoor area for events when, like a parade or during good weather on the first floor. And then the applicant also proposes to have residential uses on the second floor. Now, the interior uses aren't the question. It really has to do with these exterior modifications. The applicant turned in their application, which you have, indicating that from their perspective, they believed they were improving it and that it was in conformance with the Main Street design guidelines, and that the alternatives were not satisfactory in their mind, and hope that you would agree with that. We prepared for you the memo, gave you the application, and then prepared a resolution should you, at the time you conclude the public hearing, decide you want to take action on that. Since that time, we've received one communication from the director of the Franklin County Historic Society, Diana Starazinik-Dean. I hope you all have had a chance to look at that. I found some really good information that she collected about the building and its history, and that maybe it didn't have as much history as maybe initially thought. And I know she's on the call prepared to testify, and I believe that the owner of the building who gave you the initial application is also on the call and prepared to testify about their plans.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dean, would you like to say a few words to this subject?
Hi, Diana Starazinik-Dean, Franklin County Historical Society. First, I'm really grateful for the impetus to research this building. It has a really interesting story. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the history of that building. If you happen to be able to see my screen behind me, the building is actually the dark building over my right shoulder. This is the only picture we have of this building where there isn't floodwater in front of it. And that's actually part of the story. That 100 block flooded all the time. When Ottawa was founded in 1864, the town made it to 1898 before we really started to see tremendous flooding. And then after that, we saw a lot of tremendous flooding, and that's why we have 1,200 pictures of floods in our collection. This block in particular, up through the early 1900s, was very much an industrial block. Think blacksmith shops, wagon repairs, livery stables, those kinds of businesses. And so the photos that you see attest to that. And then over time, the places where you parked your horse became the places where you parked your car. So it was not quite the same sort of commercial building area that you would have with shops and groceries and things like that. But what's interesting about this space is the building was misidentified, I think, in both the appraiser's website as well as on the actual nomination for the historic register. The building is not from the 1890s. We know, if you look at your packet, you can see there was a little one-story building there originally. In 1912, it was torn down. It was a little wood frame building, and it was torn down. And the person who bought and rebuilt it was someone named LeMaster, and he, well, it was really kind of a sofa fort. He basically strung a roof from one wall of one building at 119 and the wall of the building at 115, and put a front on it and called it a building. That building didn't last long, and the building that we have now is from 1919, still a century building, and still older than some of the other buildings on Main Street. But it's really interesting because it was built by J.H. Wilson, who is Bud Wilson, who was an African American blacksmith, the first free child born to formerly enslaved parents. And he was very well respected in this community, but thinking at that time, Main Street was not necessarily open to people who were not white. And so I find it really interesting that he was able to buy this property and develop it. And that's the building that's still standing there. It survived flood after flood, and a lot of its neighbors didn't. Now it's the last standing building as you approach the river from the south, but there used to be 119, there was an alley, and then there were yet 2 more buildings after that. I mean, it was just right up to the river's edge. And so that area has changed quite a bit. So the miracle is that the building is still there. And as you can see, we do have a lot of documentation to show what it looked like in the past, and could do a respectful front that respected that appearance if that's what you preferred to do or preferred to approve. So that, just in a nutshell, that's the history of that building. And I'm really pleased to see something is happening with it, because I hate to see another historic building in trouble. But we do have information on it, enough photographs. And I actually just found another one from the 51 flood that shows us what the front of that building looked like too. So we do have enough information available should the owner want to pursue a front that looks more like what it would have, which could then potentially turn it into a contributing building to downtown. Currently, the State Historic Preservation Office has it listed as non-contributing because the Waymeyer's Food Market had changed it so dramatically when they connected 3 buildings together to make one storefront, which I don't think would be even allowed today, to turn 3 vertical buildings into 1 horizontal one. So I'm happy to field any questions on the history of this building, but that's really kind of the basics of what I wanted to just share with you. It doesn't seem like much right now, but you know, there were all kinds of pool halls and all kinds of the Masons met there, the Knights of Pythias met there, and it was a community center for a long time, and it's just been empty for a long time. So I'm really hopeful for this building's future.
Well, thank you for your remarks. Let's move on to the applicant. Kyle Thurman, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Tell us what you're going to do.
Yeah, so basically I bought the building from a gentleman that bought it at the tax sale. I want to say 2 years ago, maybe, or 3 years, the last tax sale they had. And unfortunately I wasn't paying attention when it sold, because Colt Waymeyer was telling me about how his family used to own it, or, you know, there's a grocery store in it. And so I wasn't paying attention. And I think it sold for $250, maybe. I don't remember. I then purchased it from the gentleman that bought it. I'm basically going to put 2 apartments upstairs. The downstairs is going to be office space. We're going to use it for, you know, I own Heartland Design Build, and we build residential homes around town. We also have just recently purchased the old Lincoln School lot, and so we're building 18 rentals up there. So we're just going to kind of use it as a headquarters. And I wanted the nice aspect of being able to open the front of the store. Like several other buildings downtown, there's one right across the street. Wise Guys Construction has a glass door. Right up on the north side of the river, Advantage Electric, owned by Eric Crowley, he has a garage door on his. I didn't like the look of a garage door, but I liked the feel of how you could open the storefront up. So I did some research and actually purchased this. It's essentially a bifolding door. When it opens up, it'll give it a nice indoor-outdoor feel. So yeah, that's where we're at, and evidently it doesn't meet the historical value.
Mr.
Okay,
Mayor,
thank you, Kyle. Yes,
Uh,
Wendy?
this is Wendy Lee, Director of Community Development. I thought I might just put up real quickly for anybody who didn't have a chance to download the application, some of these images that the owner just referenced. So he talked about sort of some doors that he would like to put in. That's what he means by the bifold doors. And the reference, for example, across the street is where they have a garage door, but it's a lot of glass, as you can see. And that was kind of where he found similarities to put forward to you.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak to the subject?
Commissioner Skidmore, I just have a question of Kyle. How many linear feet will you be occupying on the frontage feet?
25.
Just 25, okay.
The actual door is 20 foot. The actual opening that the door is is 20 foot. So when it accordions over, it'll actually be an 18-foot wide opening. The remainder of the frontage is going to be just a regular glass door to access the apartments upstairs.
Okay. If I understood right, Waymeyer's had 75 feet, but you just bought the 25 feet?
I'm the 25-foot closest to the river. Yes.
Okay. All right. And I did have a citizen ask me about the metal structure between you and the river. Will that remain?
Yeah, that's currently, Wendy, you might want to speak on this. It's currently owned by the city of Ottawa.
Okay.
I have reached out to her. It's blighted. I mean, it is. I've reached out to her and just said, hey, if I want to take care of it, if I want to mow it, if I want to create kind of another outdoor space, but not put anything on it. And she simply said, I think if you want to maintain it and plant stuff and keep it nice, then yes, you're welcome to. Do I speak correctly on that, Wendy?
This is Wendy Lee, Director of Community Development. So as a total aside from this application, yes, Kyle did reach out and ask about that. That is a parcel that is on a list that we presented to the city to the city manager, because as we were looking at revenue questions for this year, we created a list of all parcels the city owns that we could at least discuss with the commission about, do you want to continue to own it, or do you want to create an alternative? There are some needs with that space that make sense for us to keep it, but there's also you could have a discussion about why maybe having an adjoining owner be responsible would make sense too. And that's just a different discussion we can have at some point. Just hasn't been right because we haven't had a chance to talk about any of those tracks. But we have had conversation, just he and I, about.
This is Mayor Tom Wygant. I might remark about that. That was a project, if I recall, of Main Street with actually funded by donations. I think the Rotary Club gave 10,000 and others gave money to do that. It was like if I recall, a $20,000 project or something to really kind of give or bring attention to the what they called the old ladies, the old historic buildings in the Main Street corridor. So there might be others that are interested in preservation of those. And of course, they've been neglected since planting because things happen. But I think we need to be cognizant of those. There were donations to do that. I don't think any tax dollars were used. So the city owns it. The city always receives things that need some care. But I just wanted to add that comment.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think
Yes.
when we've talked about it, it wasn't so much that the sculpture itself necessarily had to come down, but that some of the landscaping and certainly the area behind the landscaping was less than desirable in its landscape aesthetics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that if there was some additional parking there, there's actually another tract even further east of that we also own. And so those are all kind of in that same discussion of what do we want to do with tracks. So But
Yes.
yes, you're absolutely right. There are certainly contributors that would, we'd have to have a conversation about whether we're talking about the land and the use of the land and maybe adjoining landowners maintaining it versus just clearing it. So.
Right, right. Then I recall this building having a sign on it, "Welcome to Ottawa, a community of 10,500 friendly people." When it was in use, I think with Waymar's, you might recall that.
I
We still
personally
have-
recall the sign on the other side of the street, but that could be just my memory. So
We still have 10,500 friendly people. With that, are there any more things to come before this hearing? We will close the hearing at 7:30 and ask for any discussion among the commissioners.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, right.
this is Commissioner Jorgensen, and I just would like to speak that I'm happy that the owner is taking action to dress up the property and put it back into use, get it back on the tax rolls. This may not be a historic preservation for it, but it certainly is moving it into a usable state with offices and apartments above. And I think that's really what we want to see on Main Street. Ultimately, it'd be nice if we would be able to take the buildings back to their original state, but I just don't see how that is feasibly possible for property owners to do.
Thank you, Commissioner Jorgensen. Anyone else? I would certainly echo Commissioner Jorgensen's remarks. It's good to see an interest in restoring that building to a use and making it attractive. It has sat decaying for quite a while, vacant for a long time. And so I commend the Kyle Thurman and his group, their intentions, and I understand what the Historical Society is saying also, that when we're practical, we're going to try to save as much as we can and meet the needs of our community also. So any other comments? With that, do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, this is Mike Skidmore, Commissioner. I make the motion we approve Mr. Thurman's plans for this building.
Second.
Yes, Mayor Wygand, this is Sarah Kaler, and I would second that motion.
So, excuse me, Commissioner, just procedural question here. Amy, do you know, or Wendy, does the commission need to formally close that hearing?
the mayor did actually close the hearing at 7:30. This is Wendy. But the only procedural question I might have is the motion was to approve the project, but I think what we really need is an approval of the resolution that says there's not a feasible or prudent alternative.
This
And
is-
I amend that motion, Mr. Skidmore.
And I will, and this is Commissioner Kaler, I will approve that. I will approve that friendly amendment.
Okay. Any discussion before we vote?
Just Commissioner Skidmore again, I just want to thank Mr. Thurman for his investment in our community, not only in this project, but for so many more over the last several years. So thank you, Mr. Thurman.
I would agree with that. This is Commissioner Kaler. Thank you, Mr. Thurman. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is my time that I can talk. I'm not very good at Zoom. Tom, I'm probably right behind you. I'm really terrible at it. I just want to thank especially Wendy Lee. I filled out this application. She literally sent it back and said, "Kyle, you got to give me more." She's been great to deal with. She's been great to deal with on the Lincoln project as well. So I just want to state how happy I am that we're moving in the right direction. I'm happy with the staff that's in the positions they're in now. They're definitely way better than what was in there before. I still think we have a long ways to go as a community. On the day-to-day stuff, we still have a long ways to go, but on these projects, they've been amazing. And I want to thank that, but we have a long ways to go to get where I think we need to be. But yeah.
Well, Kyle, I don't know if Wendy would be embarrassed, but those are really nice remarks that are well deserved, and I appreciate you saying them, as I'm sure she does too. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's call for the call for the vote. Amy Finch.
This is Amy Finch, City Clerk. How do you vote? Commissioner Skidmore,
Yes.
Commissioner Jorgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Kaler,
Yes.
Mayor Wygand?
I vote yes too. Motion carries. Thank you very much for this project, and looking forward to seeing it go forward. Okay. We have item 12.
Proclamation recognizing June 2020 as Industry Appreciation Month.
Okay, proclamation to recognize, celebrate the contribution of local industries to our city. I don't know who has that proclamation. If we want it read, we don't necessarily need to, but June is usually recognizing our local industries. We used to have OFCED days, and we'd play golf and have dinner and have a speaker and to recognize and to thank them for that. So on a proclamation, we just recognize that, and we don't need any motions, reading, or any of that. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Yes, this is Amy from City Clerk speaking. That is correct. No action is required.
Okay, we do thank all of our industries. They've been going through some tough times, being shut down off and on, and mostly off the last 3 months, for hanging in there. And we wish them well as we begin to open and get back to work, bring our economy back to life. So with that, I want to move to item 13, report by City Manager Richard Neinstead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Richard Neinstead, City Manager. I have 3 things for you, 3 short things. I'll start out with my comment first, and then turn it over to a couple others. I want to follow up on what former Mayor Jackson said. I think that's important. There are a number of conversations going on in the community. One of those conversations has been started by Chief Weingartner, and I'm so proud of him for stepping forward and putting the framework together for a conversation that is the start of many of conversations. We've had youth reach out to us that want to express their feelings about the events that have happened nationally. And that is a really good thing, because it is important. It is the youth that will make this better. And our role as leaders is to say, it is up to all of us, to recognize wrong, to recognize brutality, to recognize when someone is not being treated right, and to step up and do the right thing, because we are the voice for people who cannot speak for themselves. And we can't get better if we aren't willing to stand up and say we have to get better, and we're taking actions to be better. So that's my comments about that. You all will be involved. I am pretty certain as we go down, you are involved because you are elected leaders. And I am quite sure that the community is having conversations with you. And I'm quite sure that you are reinforcing that we have values not only in our community, but we value right and wrong. And if we do something wrong, we are going to step up. We're going to recognize it. We're going to correct it and move forward. So thank you very much for the work that you do every day as an elected official and leader in this community. So with that, I'm going to ask Wendy Lee, Community Development Director, to tell you some exciting news, and then I will turn it over to Adam Weingartner, who will also, Chief Adam Weingartner, who will also tell you some exciting news, and that will end my report, which is some exciting news probably to you.
Mr. Mayor, this is Wendy Lee, Director of Community Development. We got word at like 1 minute till 5 o'clock last night that we had been awarded some CDBG grant money in the economic development category. You'll recall that we've been talking about this the last few meetings, and we applied for $300,000. We were awarded $132,000. From looking at the list, most of the communities, that is exactly what they got. On top of the money that we got to use locally, the county also received $132,000 to make use of in the area outside of the city of Ottawa.
Well, that is good news. Very good. Okay, that will and that will be available immediately.
No, sir. This is Wendy Lee again. We the way the grants work with the state when they're like this is we'll actually get a contract, and they'll give us either some training or more direction about how they want us to proceed. We are working with our potential grant administrator because we didn't receive as much. Our contract will also be reduced with her, but we still have our own local revolving loan funds, and so we are still working through those. So if someone's interested, whether it's with the local revolving loan fund or with that new grant money, they just need to click the button on our homepage right at the top, and it'll tell them what they need to do. And we'll be in touch with anybody who has questions and help them provide all the data that we need.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, Mrs. Lee, this is Richard Ninestead, City Manager. You might let the commission and public know how many applications we are currently addressing.
Sure. This is Wendy Lee, Director of Community Development. We just approved one yesterday. We have 4 grant applications pending for tomorrow and 1 American Eagle loan application pending. And then we're probably working with, I have probably another 3 or 4 people or businesses who are collecting data and trying to understand the process enough to be sure that they complete the application properly. So we have more coming, but we are definitely, if you recall, we were down to 157,000. I would guess potentially by the end of the week, we're going to be down to less than 120, maybe 100 as far as where people are with their requests.
Okay, thank you. Is virtually, have you had any issues with anyone applying that isn't eligible or can't meet the requirements?
Yes, sir. We had one applicant who wasn't, we've had 2 applications that were not eligible applicants. And in both cases, I suggested that they consider applying for the American Eagle loan funds. One of those applicants has indeed then completed the American Eagle loan request, because as you recall, they those loans are at 0% for 12 months. So for some people, just that little bit of borrowing without having an interest incurred is enough to kind of get them through. So so I offer that as an option anytime that's relative.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Chief Weingartner, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Adam Weingartner, Police Chief for the Ottawa Police Department. wanted to share some updates on 2 grants the department has been working on, and then make the short statements related to Richard Neinstedt and Richard Jackson's comments. First, the FEMA grant, the coronavirus COVID-19 was declared a FEMA reimbursable event dating back to the beginning of the event. And the police department is gathering the city's expenses related to that and has a conference call scheduled with the federal government here in a few weeks to begin the application process. You can do that grant a couple ways. You can wait until the end and submit a total grant request, or you can submit in $5,000 blocks. So the approach that we're taking is we're above the $5,000 minimum required amount right now to submit. So we're going to go and submit a request for reimbursement for all of the expenses we currently have. And then that will follow the regular FEMA reimbursement process. So I can't tell you exactly when those funds might come back to the city, but just know that they will, and follow some of those flood relief funds that were from last year. The second grant was issued by the Department of Justice called the Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding Grant. That was issued to law enforcement agencies to assist with responding and recovering from COVID-19 expenses. That grant is administered through the Department of Justice to the Kansas Governor's Grants Office. Stacy Allen, our Assistant Accreditation Manager, submitted our grant application, and we were notified yesterday that the department's grant application of $168,000 was approved. When the funds are released, what that's going to do for the police department is reimburse all COVID-19 related overtime expenses beginning from June 1st until the end of this year. It's going to give us the ability to do another bulk order of personal protection equipment, PPE. We're going to get to issue what's called an individual first aid kit, or an IFAC, to each officer. It'll have enough supplies for each officer to be out in the field and to provide first aid to themselves or to anyone else that might need it. A decontamination tent that will allow us to set up a decontamination station on site or remotely wherever we would need to decontaminate first responders and our vehicles that may be exposed to a COVID-19 situation, or in the future, any other pandemic events. A industrial decontamination machine that'll be available for all city buildings. The one item that we looked at speccing out is called the Clorox 360 machine. It is a cart pushed decontamination device that can decontaminate large square foot buildings in a very short amount of time, plus all of the supplies necessary. And the last item approved on that grant was a solar powered wireless CCTV trailer with 4 remote cameras. And that way, if we were to do drive up testing or have to set up a remote testing facility with some of the other first aid equipment, we'd be able to remotely access video and monitor that event without having to put first responders on scene to do that. So I just would like to personally thank Stacy Allen for her hard work and quick work to get that application submitted. And certainly thanks to all the other city departments that helped contribute information for that grant application.
Well, that's very interesting and very fortunate. Those are things that are available. There's some good things come out of any adversity, isn't there? That we'll have a greater knowledge of how we should protect our health and stay in a sanitary environment and the machinery to help keep it that way. So good things happen out of some bad things.
Thank you. Can I say one more thing, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
And you put a perfect segue in there. You know, out of tragic events sometimes come better. And just before this commission meeting, I met with a panel of community members to have a discussion leading into what we're going to be a recorded conversation about police in the community. And we'll hope to have that done sometime this week and be able to release next week. It's our first time using Zoom because of the social distancing aspect. We have to do these meetings a little bit differently, and we certainly all like to be in one room having them, but right now it's just not feasible for me to do that. So I want the community to know that the national events, the national narrative, and the feelings that are a direct result of that are being addressed by this department. They have been since the very beginning and will continue to be addressed until we have a better community understanding of where we are today and where we want to be in the future. And that's the end of my remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I applaud your attempts to get the conversation started and to bring people together to discuss our commonalities and the things that we need to understand about each other. That can't do anything but good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more remarks, Richard?
I have
taking
nothing. I have nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Commissioners, Mike Skidmore, Commissioner, would you have anything that you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'd like for Chief Weingartner to address this. We spoke about it during our study session. There could be people listening tonight that weren't listening then regarding to let the citizens be aware that the arresting techniques that our officers use are very, very different from the one that particular officer in Minneapolis used. Chief Weingartner, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Adam Weingartner, Police Chief for the Ottawa Police Departments. Part of the panel discussion will be to directly talk about that specific technique. And I can assure you that under our current policy, the use of a restraint to the neck or head is outside of the scope of our policy, except in the most extreme of environments where an officer might be fighting for their life or the life of somebody else. It is not that technique that was used is not a technique that is used. It is not a technique that is trained. And given a similar circumstance, if it occurred in this community, would be dealt with swiftly and justly. We would call our outside state resources to assist in that investigation because it's open and transparent, and it's policy of our department to do that anytime there is an officer involved use of lethal force. And I just want to pass along our condolences to the family and anyone involved in that tragic incident. I saw some great speeches today coming out of Minneapolis that I think will be as memorable as some of the civil rights speeches that we can all recite. And I'm hopeful the events that happened will have the same impact as we move forward with police in the community. And just know that we're going to do our best to represent the standards that each one of you in this community expect of us. You are our partners, and we are here to serve you. I'm going to be sharing sometime in the future in one of our other discussions Sir Robert Peel's 9 principles of policing that were developed in 1829 by the Metropolitan London Police Department. And when you read them, I think it's going to be extremely impactful how in 1829 they applied then, how today the same thing apply, and how if we could just follow those daily, we would be a better world.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Jorgensen?
I have nothing further to add to the meeting other than what's already been said.
Okay, Commissioner Kaler.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Wygand. Yeah, this is Sarah Kaler. And I want to thank Chief Weingartner and our city manager for rising up and addressing this issue right away. There's no reason to take an extra day. Every single citizen of Ottawa matters. It doesn't matter who they are, they matter. And so it is important. You need something from your committee. You should be talking to your city commissioners and to your city staff. And we want everyone to know that we're there to represent and to lift up every single citizen.
Very good. Very well said. Thank you. This is Mayor Tom Wygand, and I concur with the remarks that have been made. In that regard, it is a sad situation, but out of this, some good things can come. I think the county, by next Monday, we will move to phase 3, which still requires and still suggests social distancing, the wearing of masks, and the number of people in one approximate area. Richard, I don't know if you want to add any to that, but that's what we will be expecting to happen Monday if nothing happens adverse to that in between here and there. And we don't go to the Lake of the Ozarks and shoulder to shoulder swim.
Mr. Mayor, I think you covered it pretty close.
Okay. The announcements for this evening, we have a study session next Monday at 4 o'clock via Zoom. And then our study session the following week, June 15, at 4 p.m., also via Zoom. And then June 17 will be our next regular meeting, and that'll be at 10 a.m. in the morning, also via Zoom. If there's nothing else to come before this meeting, I will adjourn the meeting at 7:55.